My friend is so jealous. Well, he's a Scorpio. My Gemini friend could never be friends with him. And my horoscope said this year would be challenging emotionally, and my friend and I have been arguing. It sounds like a typical conversation you would have with a friend, right? Especially when it comes to the younger generations. But have you ever stopped to wonder, why do these descriptions feel so accurate? Is there real science behind astrology? Is it just psychological? Can astrology actually be useful for self-growth? And if yes, then how? There's way more behind astrology than the usual "it's just woo-woo" talk that some people used to dismiss. And here's a compilation of everything, history-wise, science-wise, psychology-wise, that they say or that they don't say, so that by the end, you'll know exactly what to think about astrology and all the talk behind it. It's Nova, and you're listening to the Supernova Shift podcast. Today is going to be very mind-opening and interesting. We're going to go through 5 chapters on astrology, starting with a word on space, ancient civilizations, and where science fails. Then chapter number 2 is going to be about scientific evidence of astrology and scientists who studied it. The definitions of astrology in the ancient and the modern world is going to be chapter 3. For chapter 4, we're going to look at the birth of astrology historically and how ancient cultures used it, my favorite part. And then 5, we'll dive into way deeper, very mysterious questions like, if astrology has no scientific evidence, why did it play a huge role into today's math and astronomy knowledge? If astrology isn't scientific, then why did so many ancient civilizations spread all over the world come up with it simultaneously? They started doing it together at the same time almost. How come we actually really identify with our sign's personality traits? Beyond basic explanations like, oh, it's the Burnham effect, and like you unconsciously identify with, no. We're gonna go into a lot deeper. So a lot of fun ahead, and since I don't like long intros and I want to get right into it, we're going to start with chapter 1. Now, there's a reason that this entire podcast aesthetic is centered around space. I'm fascinated by space. I always have been. And who isn't, frankly? Space is an endless source of beauty, wonder, and fascination, inspiration for art, literature, science. Our ancestors were apparently just as fascinated as us, if not more. Almost all ancient civilizations used astrology as a science and as a way to predict weather, political events, omens, floods, harvests, wars, etc. And the fascinating thing here is that all these ancient civilizations, like ancient Egyptians, Greek, Chinese, Vedic Indians, Babylonians, etc., were all reading the stars and cosmos for answers at the same time. They were all developing their knowledge and beliefs of stars and space almost simultaneously. Of course, all these ancient civilizations weren't happening like exactly simultaneously, but I hope you know what I mean. Even though these populations lived separately from each other, they lived in all different parts of the globe, and they had little to no way of communicating their ideas. And they all came up with very similar things. Like, isn't that insane? That says something. And I'm fascinated by ancient civilizations because they had so much wisdom. They had all the secrets that we now lost. And there's so many meditation, yoga, tai chi, martial arts, you could say secrets that seem lost now. And India, especially, is called a living museum of the ancient world and its lost civilizations. Because India has yoga, it has Vedic astrology, Ayurvedic medicine, and so many other things we barely understand today. Science is only starting to recognize the benefits of these practices, even though they've already existed for thousands of years. Isn't that mind-blowing? It's existed for so long, and yet science can only measure the results today. I love science, anatomy, chemistry. It's super interesting, and it can explain some things, but I'm a firm believer that science isn't the answer to everything. This is very controversial, but science can't explain everything and refers to the things that it can't explain as impossible. Science cannot explain, there's a lot of things that science can't explain, like the origin of the universe, the nature of consciousness, the role of dark matter, and so many other things. We don't know everything. And there's a saying in Harvard Medical School that we don't have like an exact quote, but it goes kind of like this: half of what we are going to teach you is wrong, and half of it is right. Our problem is that we don't know which half is which. And it's kind of like a joke in Harvard that, one half is wrong, one half is right, but we don't know which half it is. Science is also constantly evolving, and we're learning every day that stuff we thought about, we thought we knew 25 years ago, was actually erroneous. The growth of science knowledge is literally exponential. I don't remember the exact data, but the knowledge in science was constantly, every day, there's so much more knowledge that gets added on the pile of what we know every day, and it's impossible to know everything. Where I'm trying to go is, same goes for astrology. I think it's not because science can't explain any of it that it might not have roots of truth. I think ancient civilizations knew a great deal more than we do today about a lot of things, and if all the civilizations used it simultaneously on their own for thousands of years, it can't just all be dismissible BS. You know what I mean? Chapter 2 is going to be very short because there basically isn't any scientific evidence behind astrology. But no worries, we won't stop there. The reason why astrology is not considered a science is because science is based on observation, experimentation, logical reasoning, and then data, tests, and experiences to prove that it works. And astrology predictions are not based on this. So nowadays, astronomy and astrology are two different things. Astronomy is an actual branch of science that deals with celestial objects, space, and the physical universe as a whole, like it's an actual science. But astrology is the study of the movements of celestial bodies, where we're going to interpret their positions as having influence on human affairs and the natural world. So astronomy is actually going to be with like math and stuff, and then astrology is kind of like divination, where you're going to guess stuff based on the position of stars and planets and things like that. But it's not because science stops there that we should. There's a lot more research to do. If you ask Google or ChatGPT, it's going to give you a very generic answer. And I did digging beyond that because I don't stop at a generic answer. We're going to go right away into chapter 3. This is where the interesting part starts. The definitions of astrology in the ancient and the modern world. What was the difference between astrology thousands of years ago and astrology now? And I think the history is honestly the most interesting part here, because in the ancient view, astrology was a sacred science. Back then, it was still a science before it was separated, like astronomy, astrology. And it was not just horoscopes, but so much more, like about the cosmos reflecting divine order. The famous phrase that you might have heard, as above, so below, from Hermetic philosophy, summed up that the movements of the stars and the planets mirrored events that would happen on Earth. So Babylonians, for example, predicted floods, harvests, wars, because, harvests would kind of decide if people were going to survive or not, if they were going to have food. Floods is also impacting the harvests, but in positive or negative ways. We'll see that later. The Babylonians were actually some of the earliest record keepers of the stars, 2,000 years before Christ. And their zodiac consisted of 12 signs, like today, laying Western astrology ground. And by researching astrology, this is where it gets interesting. Babylonians made contributions to mathematics and astronomy, which are considered sciences. Greeks, on the other hand, connected it with philosophy to understand cosmic harmony. You can interpret cosmic harmony however you like. And in many cultures like Egyptian, Chinese, and Mayan, astrology was tied to calendars, rituals, and leadership decisions. So it was more of a practical side to tell time, to make like a year, etc. And the curious thing here is that history cannot pinpoint how all these civilizations separately came up with the idea that stars and planets influenced their lives. And it was believed, for example, that moon cycles affected sleep. Science can't really explain this phenomenon. That was believed actually thousands of years ago, that the cycles of the moon would affect your sleep. And I think I read something about the fact that, the moon, how it moves around the Earth, is going to determine the tide of the ocean. So it would influence the position of the liquids in our bodies. I don't know, I read that somewhere, I don't remember, I don't have the source at all. But it's something that once again was believed a long time ago, and we don't have the explanation today. The modern view of astrology is the one that you're going to be familiar with, because today astrology is defined in a narrower sense. So we think automatically horoscopes, zodiac signs, natal charts. And instead of predicting wars, people use it nowadays for self-reflection, personality insight, and guidance in their lives, and also, I think, a sense of belonging. Like you belong to a group, and it roots discussions with your friends. It makes this sense of belonging that is born. Now we're going to move on to the 4th chapter, which is the longest one because there's so much to say. The birth of astrology historically, and how ancient cultures actually used it, because they did not use it for divination and like personal insight that much. It was actually very practical. And all of this is going to be in order, in a tight, well-sourced historical walkthrough. My sources are from various encyclopedias, Oxford sources, an Egypt museum, and the Enuma, Anu, Enlil tablet 63, the Venus tablet of, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but Amisaduqa, a significant Babylonian text. This is actually very serious. And we'll go through Babylon, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, the Mayas in Mesoamerica, and Chinese dynasties. You'll be really surprised at how astrology had a big place in daily life and predictions. So time, weather, wars, floods, harvests, like a lot of things. And we're going to start with Babylon, which is kind of like the cradle of astrology, where it all started. In Mesopotamia, in the 2nd millennium before Christ, astrology began as omen watching. Omen means signs of good or evil. Court scholars would track the moon, the sun, the planets, and unusual sky events like eclipses to forecast, for example, the king's fate or the realm's health. And these signs of good or evil, these omens, were compiled in the vast series Enuma, Anu, and Enlil, which is the tablet that I spoke of. And if a bad sign appeared, priests performed rituals to avert it. Babylonians were the earliest known civilization to accurately predict solar eclipses using clay tablets. Isn't that mind-blowing? Plus, the accuracy was so precise that even scientists today are mind-blown by the accuracy. And then they went from omens to more of a system. There were some compendium. So compendium means compilations of knowledge about particular subjects, kind of like an encyclopedia. Like Mulapin, it's spelled MUL.APIN, which is an ancient text of Mesopotamian astronomy. And it's basically organized constellations, rising or setting times, and calendars, which was kind of the bridge between practical astronomy, where you actually do something with it, and divination, which is kind of a more, some people qualify it as like a woo-woo thing, which at its core, divination means predicting the future. And by the 5th century before Christ, Babylonians had standardized the 12-sign zodiac and planetary techniques that later spread to the West. In ancient Egypt, one of my favorite ancient civilizations, they used it for very practical things like timekeeping. They had decans. They divided the sky in 36 decans, which are star groups rising roughly every 10 days to tell time at night and structure ritual calendars. Because they were very religious, they lived around all these gods and they had all these temples. And people's lives depended on the Nile River, the Nile River. Their lives depended on the floods of this river, which enabled their farming. And the star called Sirius, which you might have heard, they would call Sopdet, and it would disappear from the night sky 70 days each year. And when it would reappear at sunrise, it was called heliacal rising. And this rising happened right before the annual Nile flood, which would water and fertilize their fields. And people saw that as divine timing. It does kind of sound magical. Like the star would disappear from the night sky, and then 70 days later, it would reappear, and that was when the Nile floods would fertilize their fields. It does sound kind of magical, and that was quickly tied to rebirth and the Egyptian New Year. Then there was zodiac imagery, the famous Dendera zodiac. It's a famous stone carving on the ceiling of the Temple of Hathor in Egypt when it was under Greco-Roman influence, and it shows the entire circular zodiac, the one we actually know today, which include Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. And that was the earliest depiction as we know it, being in Egypt. Zodiac imagery symbolized the order of the cosmos and how the heavens connected to the divine, because they were very religious, and they were carved on temple ceilings. And we talked about the practical timing and the calendar aspect, but astrological divination, so guessing the future and all that, came later with Mediterranean influence. 3 more to go. Now we have Greece and the Hellenistic synthesis. So basically, I can't even pronounce this word. Hellenistic means the Greek-influenced world after Alexander the Great. So after Alexander's conquests, Hellenistic astrologers in Alexandria blended Babylonian zodiacal math with Egyptian decans, so the sky divided in 36 decans, and temple timing. And that created a sort of horoscopic astrology, the natal charts, so house, aspects, ascendant, which we recognize today. And there was also famous figure Claudius Ptolemy, who wrote a book called Tetrabiblos. Wait, I gotta remember my physics. The 4 books where he codified astrology's rules by the 2nd century after Christ. He organized horoscopic astrology, so birth charts, signs, houses, aspects, and by linking planets and stars to natural causes like weather, but also health or personality. And he tried to give astrology a scientific framework. From there, techniques diffused across the Roman world and later into the Arabic, medieval Latin, and beyond. Then we have the Maya in Mesoamerica. So Mesoamerica is the ancient civilizations of central Mexico down to northern Central America. And they shared, there were all these ancient civilizations that would share culture, gods, among other things. And the Mayas were one of those ancient civilizations that used astrology in their daily life. I live in Guatemala right now, and half of the population is Maya. So the Maya ran multiple interlocking calendars, the 260-day ritual cycle and the 365-day year that we know. And they also produced sophisticated tables in the Dresden Code. The Dresden Code is the oldest surviving Mayan manuscript with crazy precise astronomy charts. And especially the Venus table, which tracked the planet, Venus' cycle, also called the morning star, and they would track the rising and the setting of the star, I guess you could say. Venus cycles were used to time warfare, rituals, and rulership acts. It was not really for personal horoscopes. But why Venus? Why this planet? The Dresden Codex had astronomical almanacs. So almanacs are books that are published every year with important annual info. It can be used in different contexts. And they show precise long-term tracking and omen meanings. So remember omen, evil, good and evil. And these meanings were attached to phases and appearances of Venus. It was a mix of observation and divination. Our last ancient civilizations before chapter 5 is Imperial China. I lived in Taiwan, so again, this really interests me. In early Imperial China, there was sky watching, also called, forgive me for my white girl pronunciation, but Tianwen, which means patterns of the sky, if you decompose the characters. And it was part of government rule. It had to do with imperial rule. Comets, eclipses, and planetary patterns were read as omens of the emperor's virtue. One system was the heavenly stems and earthly branches, which was a cycle of numbers and characters that combines to make a 60-year repeating calendar. And later, the 12-animal zodiac that tied birth years to luck, personality, and life events. They include the year, you have the year of the rat, the year of the ox, tiger, rabbit. And since I lived in Taiwan, really close to China, I'm really familiar with this. Each year is a different animal, and I was born in the year of the ox. So according to Chinese astrology, they say that my personality is grounded, stable, responsible, practical. I have a deep connection with nature, and I love structure. And in short, I'm supposed to be calm, determined, steady and reliable when it comes to achieving big things through persistence. And honestly, my whole personality breakdown is very true, except the calm part. Guess what? Okay, I'm not very patient. I don't know if that's a synonym for calm, but I'm an INTJ, and the INTJ personality is almost 100% me. And the year of the ox personality is pretty much the same as the INTJ personality. So that's a very fun thing to notice. But I would love if you would share, if you know about the Myers-Briggs test, you could share what personality you are, like ISFJ, INTJ. Or if you're from China or Taiwan, tell me which year you were born in the Chinese zodiac. That would be so interesting. Now, chapter 5, the mysterious talk that you've been waiting for. The reason given to explain why we identify with our zodiac sign is that it's just a psychological trick. They call it the Barnum effect, where basically we find vague statements, personality statements, to describe us accurately because we want to believe them. And science hasn't proven astrology as a measurable force that is accurate in predicting things. For example, weather. It's considered a science. Sometimes it's wrong, but it's based on actual predictions that actually work. I've had the thought of, the weather forecast being wrong, but even though it's considered a science, but it is more predictable than astrology, of course. But here's what I can't dismiss. I can't shake it off. Why did so many ancient civilizations all across the world, all without contact, develop astrology-like systems at the same time? Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese, Mayans were all mapping stars and planets for practical use, like weather, time, calendars. And if they kept using it, it meant it worked, right? Why would they stop? Why would they continue using something that doesn't work? And then they started searching for answers in the stars as well. That's where divination kicked in. And I really think ancient civilizations have so much to teach us and hold so many secrets we might never discover again. And they did not come up with all this woo-woo stuff. They built calendars, they predicted eclipses for the first time with goddamn clay tablets, and tracked planetary cycles with an accuracy that still stuns scientists to this day. Maybe astrology isn't about predicting your future in a scientific experiment like lab coat sense. Maybe it's about something deeper, like a way of saying we're not separate from the universe, but we're a reflection of it. We're part of the universe's body, right? That's what Eckhart Tolle basically says in The Power of Now. Really good book I talk about in literally every single episode, The Power of Now. The author is one of the most influential books in the world. The book was translated in 33 languages, sold in millions of copies, famous in India, which is like the birthplace of spirituality. So yes, science dismisses astrology, even though it helped shape today's math and astronomy knowledge. But the fact that it has resonated for thousands of years across every culture makes me think that there's more to it than just it's tricking your brain. I would love for you to comment what you think, what your culture thinks about astrology, the place it has in your family, in your culture. Your opinion matters, and I would love to hear it. Now I'm just going to talk about a few scientists that actually were interested in astrology, and they were scientists, they were not just like random people. Like Carl Jung, you've probably heard of him, right? Founder of analytical psychology. Said, you study him in school, he said that astrology represents the sum of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. He also used astrology in his own practice to understand patients' personalities and life patterns. There's also Kepler, I think it's Johann Kepler, an astronomer in the 17th century, gave us the laws of planetary motion. But he rejected astrology as a superstition, but he did say this, which I will simplify in a sec because dude was complicated. He said, a most unfailing experience of the excitement of sublunary natures by the conjunctions and aspects of the planets have instructed and compelled my unwilling belief. Okay, I did not expect you to understand this quote because I read it like 10 times and I was still like, WTF, but you could simplify it as he observed how the alignment of planets affected even events on Earth over time, he was forced to believe in their influence, even though he was initially skeptical. Initially, he didn't believe in it, but as he observed, he was like, yeah, wait, this works. Bro discovered the laws of the movements of planets around the sun in the 17th century using a telescope and a piece of paper with a math table. And he said that, like, seriously, what more do you need? Anyways, Sadly, we are heading toward the end of this episode. Anyways, a lot more could be said about this, so please comment if you would like a part 2. But I have to stop here or else my brain is gonna burst into flames. So remember to check out my Instagram where I have all the quotes and all the tips that you might want, the bullet journal inspiration, the recipe inspiration. Remember that it's also available on YouTube and Spotify. It's available on both. And I'll see you at the exact same place and at the exact same time next Monday for a brand new episode. Oh, and I almost forgot, the music is from amazing Retro Radio. You can check them out on YouTube. This is a 60s jazz playlist.